The doctor whispered, "Your family is waiting for you to die." What I did with my 8 million fortune after that left them all speechless. I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to my channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I was lying in that hospital bed, tubes in my arms, machines beeping around me, when Dr. Sarah Chen leaned close and whispered something that changed everything. My daughter Victoria had just left the room, her designer heels clicking down the hallway, and the doctor's face was filled with concern. "Margaret," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something. I overheard your family in the waiting room. They weren't talking about your recovery. They were discussing your will." My heart monitor started beeping faster, but not because of my illness. Margaret Chen was 68 years old, lying in a private room at Seattle Presbyterian Hospital. She had built a fortune from nothing, starting with a small Asian grocery store in 1982 and eventually creating a chain of 15 successful supermarkets across Washington state. The business was worth $8 million, maybe more if you counted the real estate. She had always been proud of what she built. As a Chinese immigrant who arrived in America at age 23 with just $200 in her pocket and broken English, she worked 16-hour days for 40 years. Her husband Robert had died 10 years ago from a sudden heart attack, leaving her alone to manage everything. But she wasn't really alone. She had her family, her daughter Victoria, age 42, a real estate agent in downtown Seattle. Her son Marcus, age 39, who claimed to be a business consultant but mostly seemed to attend expensive conferences. And her grandson Tyler, Victoria's 19-year-old son, who was supposedly studying business at the University of Washington. Margaret had always been generous with them. Too generous, her late husband used to say. When Victoria divorced her first husband, Margaret gave her $150,000 for a new condo. When Marcus needed money to start his consulting business, she gave him $200,000. When Tyler wanted to go to private school, she paid the $40,000 annual tuition for 4 years. She never asked for the money back. They were family. But 3 weeks ago, Margaret started feeling sick. Really sick. She collapsed in her office at the flagship store on Madison Street. The ambulance came, the doctors ran tests, and they found something serious: stage 3 liver disease. Not cancer, but severe damage from years of stress and maybe some genetic factors. The doctors said she needed treatment, maybe even a transplant eventually, but she could recover with the right care. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, Victoria visited every day, always dressed in expensive clothes, always talking about how worried she was. Marcus came less often, usually with papers for Margaret to sign, business documents he said were urgent. Tyler never visited at all. He texted once, "Sorry, Grandma. Finals week. Get well soon." Margaret noticed things. Small things at first. The way Victoria's eyes lit up when the doctor mentioned how serious the condition was. The way Marcus asked detailed questions about the prognosis, the timeline, the chances of recovery. The way they both suddenly became very interested in her business affairs, her properties, her bank accounts. "Mom, we should talk about your estate planning," Victoria said one afternoon, sitting in the uncomfortable hospital chair with her Louis Vuitton purse on her lap. "Just in case, to protect your legacy." "I'm not dying," Margaret replied, her voice weak but firm. "Of course not," Victoria smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "But it's smart to be prepared. Marcus and I have been talking to a lawyer, Mr. Harrison, very reputable. He can help make sure everything is in order." Margaret noticed Victoria didn't say, "help you get better" or "help you recover." She said, "make sure everything is in order," as if Margaret's death was just a matter of paperwork. The next day, Marcus brought documents. "Mom, this is just a power of attorney. It lets Victoria and me handle your business affairs while you're sick. Pay bills, manage the stores, keep everything running smoothly." Margaret's hand trembled as she held the pen. Something felt wrong. "I have accountants for that. I have managers. But they're not family," Marcus insisted. "Don't you trust us?" That word, trust, it hung in the air like a challenge. If she didn't sign, she didn't trust her own children. What kind of mother doesn't trust her own children? She signed. That night, alone in her hospital room, Margaret couldn't sleep. The machines beeped steadily. The nurses checked on her every 2 hours, but her mind raced. She thought about the $8 million business, the properties, the bank accounts. She thought about Victoria's designer clothes and Marcus's expensive watch. She thought about how they asked about her will but never asked how she was feeling. She pressed the call button. A young nurse came in, someone new Margaret hadn't seen before. "Can you do me a favor?" Margaret asked. "Can you find Dr. Chen? Tell her I need to talk to her privately." An hour later, Dr. Sarah Chen sat beside Margaret's bed. They had known each other for years. Dr. Chen's parents used to shop at Margaret's first store back in the 1980s. There was trust there, real trust. "I need you to tell me the truth," Margaret said. "Am I dying?" Dr. Chen shook her head. "No, your condition is serious but treatable. With proper care and lifestyle changes, you could live another 20 years easily." "Then why do my children act like I'm already dead?" Dr. Chen's face changed. She looked uncomfortable, like she was deciding whether to say something. Finally, she leaned close and whispered the words that would change everything. The next morning, Margaret pretended to be asleep when Victoria arrived. She kept her eyes closed but her ears open, listening to her daughter make phone calls in the hallway. "Yes, Mr. Harrison, we have the power of attorney signed." Victoria's voice carried through the half-open door. "How quickly can we start transferring assets? What do you mean we have to wait? She could recover?" No, the doctor said it was very serious. Stage 3. "Yes, I know what that means, but she's old. These things progress quickly at her age." Margaret's heart sank. Her own daughter was talking about her death like it was a business transaction. Over the next few days, Margaret became a detective in her own life. She pretended to be weaker than she actually was, sleeping when visitors came, appearing confused and tired. But when they left, she made phone calls. She called her accountant, James Wu, who had managed her books for 15 years. "James, I need you to check something for me," Margaret said quietly. "Have there been any unusual transactions in my business accounts in the past 3 weeks?" James was silent for a moment. "Margaret, I was going to call you. Victoria came to the office 2 days ago with the power of attorney. She wanted to transfer $500,000 from the business account to her personal account. She said it was for your medical expenses, but I told her I needed your direct approval first." Margaret's blood ran cold. $500,000. Her medical expenses were covered by insurance. What would Victoria need $500,000 for? "Don't approve anything without my direct call," Margaret instructed. "And James, can you do me another favor? I want you to review all the documents Marcus has been bringing me to sign. I think I may have signed something I shouldn't have." 2 days later, James came to visit with his laptop and a file folder full of papers. He waited until Victoria and Marcus had left for the evening, then pulled a chair close to Margaret's bed. "Margaret, you need to see this," he said, opening his laptop. "Remember that document Marcus brought you last week? The one he said was about changing the business structure for tax purposes?" Margaret nodded. She barely remembered signing it. She'd been tired, in pain, trusting her son. "It wasn't about taxes," James continued. "It was a document transferring 40% ownership of your business to Marcus and 40% to Victoria. You're now a minority owner of your own company." The room started spinning. Margaret gripped the bed rails. How is that possible? The document was very technical, full of legal language. It looked like a routine business filing, but buried in the fine print was the ownership transfer. "Marcus told me you wanted to start succession planning, so I didn't question it." "I'm so sorry, Margaret. I should have reviewed it more carefully." Margaret felt like she couldn't breathe. 40 years of work, 16-hour days, sacrificing time with her husband, with her children when they were young, building something from nothing. And her own children had stolen it from under her while she lay sick in a hospital bed. But there was more. "There's something else," James said, his face grim. "I did some digging into Victoria's finances. She has significant debts, credit cards, personal loans. She's in the hole for about $300,000. And Marcus, his consulting business is bankrupt. He hasn't had a real client in 2 years. He's been living off credit cards and loans from questionable sources." "How much does he owe?" Margaret asked. "About $400,000, possibly more." "Margaret, I think they're planning to sell your business to pay their debts." Margaret closed her eyes. The machines beeped around her, steady and monotonous. Her children weren't waiting for her to recover. They were waiting for her to die so they could take everything. And they weren't even waiting that patiently. They were taking it now, piece by piece, while she was too weak to fight back. Or so they thought. That night, Margaret couldn't sleep again. She lay in the dark, listening to the night nurses making their rounds, thinking about everything she had sacrificed. She remembered arriving in America, young and scared, speaking almost no English. She remembered the first grocery store, barely 800 square feet in a rough neighborhood where nobody else wanted to invest. She remembered Robert working beside her, stocking shelves at 5 a.m. before going to his day job as an accountant. She remembered being pregnant with Victoria, working until the day she went into labor, then bringing the baby to the store in a bassinet because they couldn't afford childcare. She had built an empire for her children, and they were destroying it while she was still alive. But Margaret Chen didn't build a multi-million-dollar business by being weak. She built it by being smart, strategic, and when necessary, ruthless. If her children wanted to play games with her legacy, she would show them what happened when you bet against Margaret Chen. The next morning, Margaret called her lawyer, not the one Marcus had recommended, but her own lawyer, Patricia Rodriguez, who had handled her business contracts for 20 years. "Patricia, I need you to come to the hospital," Margaret said, "and I need you to bring everything, every document about my business, my properties, my accounts. And Patricia, come after visiting hours. I don't want my children to know." Patricia arrived at 8 p.m. with 2 file boxes and a briefcase. She was a sharp woman in her 50s, with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. "Margaret, what's going on?" Patricia asked, setting up her laptop on the hospital bed table. Margaret told her everything: the overheard conversation, the power of attorney, the ownership transfer, the debts, the plan to sell her business. With each revelation, Patricia's face grew harder. "Those bastards," Patricia said, and it was the first time Margaret had ever heard her curse. "I'm sorry, but that's what they are. This is elder financial abuse. It's illegal. We can fight this." "I don't want to fight," Margaret said calmly. "I want to win, and I want them to never see it coming." Patricia smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a lawyer who was about to destroy someone in court. "Tell me what you want to do." They talked for 3 hours. Patricia took notes, asked questions, made phone calls to colleagues who specialized in estate law and family law. By the time she left at 11 p.m., they had a plan. A beautiful, perfect, devastating plan. But first, Margaret needed to know exactly how deep the betrayal went. She needed evidence. She needed to catch them in the act. The next day, Margaret asked her nurse if she could borrow a phone charger. When the nurse brought one, Margaret asked another favor. "My phone is old and slow. Could you help me update it? Maybe download some apps my grandson told me about?" The kind nurse, a young woman named Jennifer, spent an hour helping Margaret set up her smartphone properly, including installing a voice recording app that Margaret could activate with one tap. That afternoon, when Victoria arrived with Marcus, Margaret pretended to be sleeping. She had activated the recording app before they entered. Her phone lay on the bedside table, innocently charging. "She looks worse today," Victoria said, her voice carrying perfectly to the phone's microphone. "The doctor said her liver function is declining," Marcus replied. "Could be weeks, could be months. But Harrison said we don't have to wait that long. Once we have full power of attorney, we can start liquidating assets. What about the stores? Victoria asked. I already have a buyer interested, Pacific Northwest Grocers. They'll pay $6.5 million cash for the whole chain. We could close in 60 days. That's less than it's worth. It's liquid cash, Victoria. No waiting for probate, no fighting over assets. We split it 60-40 like we agreed, pay off our debts, and still walk away with millions each. What about Tyler? Marcus laughed. What about him? He's your kid, you figure it out. I'm not sharing my half with anyone. Mom always said she wanted to leave something for her grandson. Mom isn't making decisions anymore. We are. And frankly, I think we've earned it. Do you know how many times she made me feel like a failure? How many times she compared me to other people's sons? This is our inheritance. We're just collecting it a little early. Margaret's eyes were closed, but tears leaked from the corners. She had never made Marcus feel like a failure. She had supported every business idea, every venture, even when Robert told her to stop enabling him. And this was how he repaid her. When do we tell Tyler? Victoria asked. We don't. The less people know, the better. After we sell the business and Mom is gone, we'll give him some token amount. $50,000 maybe, enough to shut him up. They talked for another 20 minutes about their plans, about selling the properties, closing the stores, even canceling her life insurance policy and taking the cash value. They had thought of everything, except the possibility that their mother was awake, listening, recording every word. After they left, Margaret stopped the recording and emailed it to Patricia with shaking hands. Then she lay back on her pillows and smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a woman who had just armed herself for war. Dr. Chen came in during evening rounds. How are you feeling today, Margaret? Stronger, Margaret replied. Much stronger. In fact, I think I'm ready to start planning my discharge. How soon can I leave? Dr. Chen checked her chart. Your liver function has actually stabilized. The medication is working better than expected. If you continue improving, you could go home in a week. Make it 3 days, Margaret said. I have work to do. On the third day, Margaret left the hospital. Not to go home, but to go to Patricia's office. Victoria had offered to pick her up, but Margaret declined, saying the hospital would arrange medical transport. Instead, Patricia sent her assistant with a wheelchair and a car. At Patricia's office, a conference room table was covered with documents. Patricia was there, along with James Wu, the accountant, and another man Margaret didn't recognize. Margaret, this is Detective Richard Morrison, Patricia introduced him. He specializes in financial crimes and elder abuse. The detective was a solid man in his 40s, with kind eyes and a firm handshake. Mrs. Chen, I've reviewed the evidence you've gathered. The recording, the fraudulent documents, the attempted asset transfers. This is a clear case of elder financial abuse under Washington state law. If you want to press charges, we have enough for arrest warrants. Margaret sat down carefully. She was still weak, but her mind was sharp. I don't want them arrested. Not yet. I want something better. Everyone looked at her. I want them to think they've won, Margaret continued. I want them to believe they've gotten away with it. And then I want to take everything. Patricia smiled. Tell us your plan. Margaret laid it out. Step by step, detail by detail. It was brilliant. It was ruthless. It was perfect. First, she would transfer all her personal assets into a new trust, a trust that Victoria and Marcus knew nothing about. Her house, her bank accounts, her investments, everything except the business. The trust would be managed by Patricia and James, with instructions that nothing could be accessed by Victoria or Marcus under any circumstances. Second, she would let them sell the business. She wouldn't stop them. She would even seem to cooperate, signing whatever documents they brought her. But there was a catch. The ownership transfer Marcus had tricked her into signing? It was invalid. James had discovered that Margaret's signature had been forged on one of the witness lines. It wasn't actually Margaret's signature at all. Someone, probably Marcus's lawyer friend Harrison, had faked it. That meant the entire document was fraudulent and any sale of the business would be invalid. Third, and this was the beautiful part, she would let the sale go through. She would let Victoria and Marcus collect the $6.5 million from Pacific Northwest Grocers. She would let them think they had won. She would let them deposit the money, pay off their debts, maybe even spend some of it. And then she would prove the sale was fraudulent because they never actually owned the business in the first place. "You understand what this means?" Detective Morrison said. "If they receive money from a fraudulent sale, that's wire fraud, that's theft, that's potentially criminal conspiracy. They could face federal charges." "I understand perfectly," Margaret said, "but I want to give them one chance to do the right thing." She would stage her death. Not literally, but legally. She would disappear, move to her sister's house in Portland for a few months, let everyone think she was too sick to manage her affairs, let Victoria and Marcus execute their plan completely, and then, when they were celebrating their stolen fortune, she would come back from the dead. "It's risky," Patricia warned. "What if they spend all the money before we can stop them?" "Then they go to prison," Margaret said simply. "But I don't think they will. I think they're greedy, but not stupid. They'll keep most of it, waiting to see if anyone challenges the sale. That's when we'll strike." Patricia, James, and Detective Morrison exchanged looks. Finally, Patricia nodded. "Okay, let's do it. But Margaret, you need to understand. Once we start this, there's no going back. Your relationship with your children will be destroyed forever." Margaret thought about Victoria's cold eyes when she talked about the medical prognosis. She thought about Marcus laughing as he planned to cheat his own nephew out of his inheritance. She thought about 40 years of sacrifice reduced to a number on a spreadsheet. "They destroyed it already," Margaret said quietly. "I'm just making sure they pay for it." The plan went into motion immediately. Patricia filed the trust documents in secret, transferring Margaret's house, her personal bank accounts, and her investment portfolio into the Chen Family Trust. The business remained in Margaret's name, which was exactly what they wanted. It was the bait in the trap. Margaret called Victoria from Patricia's office. She made her voice weak, shaky, frightened. "Victoria, honey, I need to come home from the hospital. Can you help me?" Victoria's voice was all concern. "Of course, Mom. I'll pick you up tomorrow. Do you need me to stay with you for a few days?" "That would be wonderful," Margaret said, and she meant it. She wanted Victoria close. She wanted to watch her daughter play out this betrayal to the end. The next day, Victoria collected Margaret from the hospital. She helped her mother into a wheelchair, collected her medications, signed the discharge papers. She played the role of devoted daughter perfectly. In the car ride home, she talked about how worried she had been, how she had prayed every night, how relieved she was that Margaret was recovering. Margaret watched her daughter's lips move and wondered how she had raised such a skilled liar. At home, Victoria helped Margaret into bed, fluffed her pillows, brought her tea. Then she sat in the chair beside the bed and pulled out some papers from her designer purse. "Mom, I know you're tired, but Marcus and I really need to finalize some business matters. You remember we talked about restructuring the company? Well, we have a buyer interested, a very serious buyer who wants to move quickly." "A buyer?" Margaret made her voice confused. "But I don't want to sell. The stores are my life's work." Victoria took her mother's hand. Her touch was gentle, but her grip was firm. "Mom, you're sick. You can't run 15 supermarkets anymore. This buyer is offering excellent money, and Marcus and I would manage the transition. You wouldn't have to worry about anything. You could just rest and focus on getting better." "How much are they offering?" Margaret asked. $6.5 million, Victoria said, watching her mother's face carefully. Margaret pretended to be shocked. $6.5 million? That seems low. The last valuation was $8 million, that was 3 years ago, Mom. The market has changed. Retail is struggling. Online delivery is taking over. Honestly, $6.5 million is a strong offer. Marcus thinks we should take it. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I need to think about it. Victoria's expression flickered. Just for a second, Margaret saw frustration, maybe even anger. But then the devoted daughter mask was back in place. Of course. Take all the time you need. But Mom, the buyer needs an answer within a week. These opportunities don't last forever. After Victoria left, Margaret called Patricia. She's pushing for the sale. 1 week deadline. That's faster than we expected, Patricia said. Are you sure you want to let this continue? Margaret thought about the recording she had made, about Victoria and Marcus planning to cut Tyler out completely, planning to give him just enough to shut him up. She thought about how they had laughed about collecting their inheritance early. I'm sure, Margaret said. Let it play out. Over the next few days, Marcus visited twice. Each time he brought more papers. Documents about the business sale, transfer agreements, escrow instructions. He explained everything in detail, using technical language that he clearly thought Margaret wouldn't understand. But Margaret understood perfectly. She had built this business from nothing. She knew every contract, every clause, every legal requirement. And she knew that Marcus was lying about at least half of what he was telling her. The buyer wants to close quickly, Marcus explained. They're paying cash. No financing contingency. We could have the money in your account within 30 days. 30 days, Margaret repeated. That's very fast. It's a good thing, Mom. The faster we close, the less chance something goes wrong. And frankly, with your health situation, we need to be thinking about securing your financial future. My financial future, Margaret thought, or your financial present. On the 5th day, Margaret's sister Lily called from Portland. Margaret, the guest room is ready whenever you need it. Are you sure about this plan? It seems dangerous. I'm sure, Margaret replied. Lily, I need to know the truth. I need to see how far they'll go. What if they go too far? What if they actually hurt you? They already have, Margaret said quietly. Now I'm just making sure they can't hurt anyone else. On the 7th day, Margaret called Victoria and Marcus to the house. They arrived together, both dressed in business attire, both carrying briefcases full of documents. They looked like a pair of lawyers coming to execute an estate, not children visiting their sick mother. Margaret was in her bedroom, propped up on pillows. She had deliberately not showered or done her hair. She wanted to look sick, frail, beatable. I've made a decision, Margaret said, her voice weak. I'll approve the sale. Victoria and Marcus exchanged a quick glance. Victory. Margaret saw it clearly on both their faces. That's wonderful, Mom, Victoria said, pulling out papers. We have all the documents ready. We just need your signature. Margaret signed. Page after page after page. Transfer of ownership, sale agreement, escrow instructions. Her hand trembled, but she signed everything. She even initialed the margins where they indicated. When it was done, Marcus gathered the papers and put them back in his briefcase with careful precision. I'll take these to the title company tomorrow. We should close within 3 weeks. What happens after the sale? Margaret asked. You don't have to worry about anything, Victoria assured her. Marcus and I will handle everything. The money will go into your account, and we'll help you manage it. Maybe we can even find you a nice assisted living facility where you'll have proper medical care. An assisted living facility. They were already planning to warehouse her somewhere out of the way. I want to change my will, Margaret said suddenly. Both Victoria and Marcus froze. Your will? Marcus repeated carefully. Yes, I've been thinking about it. If something happens to me, I want to make sure everything is clear. I want you to call Mr. Harrison, that lawyer you mentioned. Have him come here tomorrow. Victoria and Marcus relaxed. Of course they relaxed. Harrison was their lawyer, the one who had helped forge the documents in the first place. Having him draft Margaret's will was perfect for them. "That's very wise, Mom," Victoria said. "I'll call him tonight." After they left, Margaret allowed herself a small smile. The trap was set. Tomorrow, she would spring it. That night, Detective Morrison and 2 other officers set up surveillance equipment in Margaret's house. Hidden cameras in the living room, the bedroom, the kitchen, audio recording devices that would capture every word. Patricia had obtained a court order authorizing the surveillance based on the evidence of elder abuse. "Are you ready for this?" Detective Morrison asked Margaret. "Tomorrow could get intense." Margaret thought about 40 years of building a business, about her late husband Robert, who had believed in her when no one else did, about every sacrifice, every long night, every moment she had chosen work over rest because she was building something for her family. "I've been ready my entire life," Margaret said. The next morning, Mr. Harrison arrived at 10 a.m. He was exactly what Margaret expected. Expensive suit, slick hair, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He carried a leather portfolio and set up at Margaret's dining room table like he owned the place. Victoria and Marcus were already there, having arrived 30 minutes early. Margaret came out of her bedroom in her robe, looking frail and confused. The hidden cameras recorded everything. "Mrs. Chen, I'm Robert Harrison," the lawyer said, shaking her hand with a grip that was too firm, too aggressive. "Your children have asked me to help you with your estate planning. I understand you want to update your will." "Yes," Margaret said, sitting down slowly. "I want to make sure everything goes to Victoria and Marcus. They've been so good to me." Harrison smiled. "That's very clear-headed of you. Now, I've prepared a document based on discussions with your children. It's quite simple. Upon your passing, your entire estate, including any proceeds from the business sale, will be divided equally between Victoria Chen and Marcus Chen." He slid the document across the table. It was 10 pages of dense legal text. "What about Tyler?" Margaret asked. "My grandson." Victoria leaned forward. "Mom, Tyler is young. He doesn't need the money right now. Marcus and I will make sure he's taken care of." Margaret picked up the document with shaking hands. She pretended to read it, her eyes moving across the pages. But she wasn't really reading. She was thinking about the recorder in her pocket, about the cameras hidden in her walls, about Detective Morrison listening from the van parked down the street. "Where do I sign?" Margaret asked. Harrison pointed to the last page. "Right here, Mrs. Chen, and we'll need 2 witnesses. I've brought my assistant, and your children can witness as well." Margaret picked up the pen. She held it over the signature line. Victoria and Marcus leaned forward, barely breathing, and Margaret put the pen down. "Actually," she said, and her voice was suddenly stronger, clearer, not weak at all. "I don't think I'll sign this." The room went silent. "Mom?" Victoria said carefully. "What's wrong?" Margaret stood up. She wasn't trembling anymore. She stood straight and strong, and when she looked at her children, her eyes were hard as diamonds. "What's wrong is that you're thieves," Margaret said clearly. "What's wrong is that you tried to steal my life's work while I was sick in a hospital bed. What's wrong is that I heard every word you said when you thought I was sleeping." Victoria's face went white. Marcus actually took a step backward. Mr. Harrison started gathering his papers, clearly ready to run. "I don't know what you think you heard," Victoria began, but Margaret cut her off. "I didn't think I heard anything. I know exactly what I heard because I recorded it." Margaret pulled out her phone and played the audio. Victoria's voice filled the room crystal clear. "Once we have full power of attorney, we can start liquidating assets." Then Marcus, "I already have a buyer interested. They'll pay $6.5 million cash for the whole chain." Victoria again, "What about Tyler?" Marcus laughing, "What about him? He's your kid. You figure it out. I'm not sharing my half with anyone." The recording played for 2 minutes. Every damning word, every casual betrayal. When it finished, the silence was absolute. "This is out of context," Marcus said, his voice desperate. "We were just discussing options, planning for the future." "Planning for my death," Margaret corrected. "Planning to steal my business and cut out my grandson. Oh, and Marcus, that ownership transfer you tricked me into signing, the one that gave you and Victoria 80% of my company, it's fraudulent. The signature on the witness line isn't mine. Someone forged it." Marcus's face went from white to gray. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do. I think Mr. Harrison here knows exactly what I'm talking about. Don't you, Mr. Harrison?" The lawyer was already at the door. "I'm not obligated to stay for this. If you're making accusations, you should contact the police." "Oh, I already did," Margaret said and smiled. "In fact, they've been listening to this entire conversation." On cue, Detective Morrison walked in from the kitchen where he'd been monitoring the recording equipment. 2 uniformed officers followed him. "Victoria Chen, Marcus Chen, Robert Harrison," Detective Morrison said formally, pulling out handcuffs. "You're under arrest for elder financial abuse, fraud, and conspiracy to commit theft." The next few minutes were chaos. Victoria screamed that this was a misunderstanding. Marcus tried to argue with the detective about probable cause. Harrison demanded to call his own lawyer, but the officers were professional and efficient. Within 5 minutes, all 3 were handcuffed and being led out to police cars. As they took Victoria past her, Margaret caught her daughter's arm. "I gave you everything," Margaret said quietly. "Every opportunity, every advantage, every dollar you ever needed, and you repaid me by waiting for me to die." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "Mom, please, I was desperate. The debts, the pressure, I made a mistake." "You made a choice," Margaret corrected, "and now you have to live with it." After they were gone, Margaret sat down at her dining room table. Patricia came in from the living room where she'd been watching everything with James Wu. "Well," Patricia said, "that went even better than we planned." Margaret nodded, but she didn't feel victorious. She felt tired and sad and very, very old. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Patricia said, "we make sure they can never do this to anyone else again, and we make sure your real legacy is protected." "My real legacy?" Patricia smiled. "The business, the stores, everything you built. We're going to make sure it goes to someone who deserves it." Margaret thought about Tyler, her grandson, 19 years old, studying business, completely innocent in all of this. He had no idea what his mother and uncle had planned. He still texted Margaret every few days asking how she was feeling, sending funny memes to cheer her up. "I want Tyler to have it," Margaret said. "Not now, not all at once, but I want to teach him how to run it properly. I want him to earn it." "That's a good plan," James agreed. "A very good plan." Margaret looked around her dining room, at the table where she had signed so many documents over the years. Business contracts, loan agreements, property deeds. She had built an empire from this table, and from this table, she had just destroyed the people who tried to steal it. It wasn't victory, but it was justice. The trial took 6 months to prepare. In that time, Margaret's health actually improved. The doctors were amazed. Her liver function stabilized, then actually got better. She started walking daily, eating properly, taking her medications religiously. It turned out that stress had been making her sicker, and once she removed the source of that stress, her body began to heal. Victoria and Marcus were released on bail, but with strict conditions. They couldn't contact Margaret, couldn't access any of her accounts, and had to surrender their passports. Mr. Harrison was disbarred while awaiting trial, his law license suspended for ethical violations. The story made the local news. Elderly business owner fights back against family fraud. Margaret became something of a local celebrity. Other elderly people contacted her, sharing their own stories of family members who tried to steal from them. Patricia was flooded with calls from potential clients. But the trial was what everyone was waiting for. It was held in King County Superior Court in downtown Seattle. The prosecution was led by Assistant District Attorney Maria Santos, a fierce woman in her 40s who had built her career on protecting vulnerable populations. The defense had 3 separate lawyers, one for each defendant, and they came in expensive suits with expensive arguments. The courtroom was packed. Margaret sat in the front row with Patricia and James on either side of her. Detective Morrison sat behind them. The jury was 12 Seattle residents, 7 women and 5 men, mostly middle-aged or older. The state calls Margaret Chen to the stand, Ada Santos announced. Margaret walked to the witness stand slowly. She wore a simple navy dress, pearl earrings that Robert had given her for their 20th anniversary, and no makeup except lipstick. She wanted the jury to see her as she was, an elderly woman who had been betrayed by the people she trusted most. "Mrs. Chen," Ada Santos began gently, "can you tell the jury about your relationship with your children before your hospitalization?" Margaret took a breath. "I loved them. I gave them everything, every opportunity, every advantage. When they needed money, I gave it. When they needed support, I provided it. I thought we were a close family. What changed? I got sick. And suddenly, they weren't worried about me getting better. They were worried about making sure they got my money before I recovered." The defense lawyers objected repeatedly, but Margaret's testimony was powerful. She told the jury about the hospital conversations she'd overheard, about the forged documents, about the recording where Victoria and Marcus discussed cutting Tyler out of any inheritance. When they played the recording for the jury, several jury members visibly reacted. One older woman shook her head in disgust. A middle-aged man frowned deeply. Then came Victoria's testimony. She took the stand in a designer dress, her hair perfect, her makeup flawless. She looked like a successful professional woman, not a criminal defendant. "Ms. Chen," her lawyer began, "can you explain to the jury what was happening in your life during the time your mother was hospitalized?" Victoria's voice trembled. "I was terrified. My mother was dying. At least that's what we thought. The doctors said her condition was very serious. I was trying to hold everything together. My business, my son, my mother's affairs. I wasn't trying to steal from her. I was trying to help." "And the ownership transfer document? The one your mother claims was fraudulent?" "My brother handled that. He said it was for tax purposes, for estate planning. I trusted him. I had no idea there was anything wrong with it." Throwing Marcus under the bus. Classic Victoria. Marcus's testimony was different. He was defensive, angry, combative. His lawyer tried to control him, but Marcus couldn't help himself. "My mother built a successful business, yes," Marcus said from the witness stand. "But she's old. She's sick. She can't run 15 supermarkets anymore. Someone had to step in. Someone had to make hard decisions. Victoria and I were trying to protect her legacy." "By selling her business without her permission?" Ada Santos asked on cross-examination. "She gave us permission. She signed the documents." "Documents that transferred ownership to you through forged signatures? I didn't forge anything." "Then who did, Mr. Chen? Who forged your mother's signature on the witness line of the ownership transfer?" Marcus was silent. He looked at his lawyer, then at Mr. Harrison, who was sitting at the defense table refusing to make eye contact. "I want to invoke my Fifth Amendment right," Marcus finally said. The jury noticed. They noticed everything. Mr. Harrison's testimony was the most devastating for the defense. His own lawyer tried to claim he had simply provided legal services to clients, that he had no knowledge of any fraud. But when Ada Santos introduced evidence showing text messages between Harrison and Marcus discussing how to handle the old lady, the game was over. One text message particularly damned them. "She's too trusting. If we time this right, she'll sign anything. Just make sure you're the one who brings the documents to the hospital. Don't let her talk to her own lawyer." The trial lasted 3 weeks. Both sides presented experts. Financial analysts testified about the value of Margaret's business and how the sale price was deliberately lowered to facilitate a quick transaction. Medical experts testified about Margaret's mental capacity, confirming she was completely competent when the fraud occurred. Handwriting experts confirmed the forged signature. On the last day, Ada Santos gave her closing argument. She stood in front of the jury box and spoke directly to the 12 people who would decide her case. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about trust. Margaret Chen trusted her children. She trusted them with her business, with her finances, with her legacy, and they betrayed that trust in the most callous way imaginable. They didn't wait for her to die. They didn't even wait for her to be incapacitated. They started stealing from her while she was conscious, aware, and vulnerable in a hospital bed. She paused, letting that sink in. The defense wants you to believe this was just a misunderstanding, that Victoria and Marcus were trying to help their mother. But you've heard the recording. You've heard them laugh about cutting out their own nephew. You've heard them discuss selling her life's work without her knowledge. You've seen the forged documents. This wasn't help. This was theft. Ada Santos picked up a document from her table. This is Margaret Chen's original business registration from 1982. She started with $200 and a dream. She built 15 successful supermarkets. She employed over 300 people. She created wealth and opportunity, not just for herself, but for her entire community. And her children tried to steal it all because they were impatient to get their inheritance. She looked at each juror. Elder financial abuse is one of the most pernicious crimes we prosecute because it attacks the most vulnerable among us. It attacks people who should be protected by their families, not exploited by them. Margaret Chen fought back. She was brave enough to expose her own children's fraud. Now it's up to you to hold them accountable. The jury deliberated for 2 days. In that time, Margaret tried to go about her normal life. She visited her stores, checking on managers and employees. She had lunch with Patricia and James. She called Tyler, who was devastated by what his mother and uncle had done. "Grandma," Tyler said on the phone, "I had no idea. I swear I had no idea what Mom was planning." "I know, sweetheart," Margaret assured him. "This isn't your fault." "But she's my mom. How could she do this to you?" "People make choices," Margaret said. "Sometimes those choices are wrong. Sometimes those choices have consequences." On the afternoon of the second day, Margaret's phone rang. It was Patricia. "The jury's back. They have a verdict." The courtroom was even more packed than before. News cameras lined the hallway outside. Margaret sat in her usual seat, hands folded in her lap, face calm, but her heart was racing. The jury filed in. Margaret tried to read their faces, but they were carefully neutral. The foreman, a man in his 60s with kind eyes, stood when the judge asked for the verdict. In the case of the state of Washington versus Victoria Chen, Marcus Chen, and Robert Harrison on the charge of elder financial abuse in the first degree, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of fraud in the first degree? Guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit theft? Guilty. The verdicts continued. Guilty on all counts. All 3 defendants. When the foreman finished reading, Victoria was crying, her perfect makeup running down her face. Marcus sat stone-faced, staring at the table. Harrison had his head in his hands. The judge set a sentencing hearing for 30 days later. As the bailiffs led the defendants away, Victoria looked back at Margaret one more time. Their eyes met across the courtroom. Margaret saw her daughter, her first child, the baby she had held in a bassinet at the grocery store. But she also saw a thief, a liar, someone who had wished for her mother's death so she could inherit sooner. Margaret didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just nodded once. A final acknowledgement that this was real, this was happening, this was the consequence of Victoria's choices. Then Margaret stood up, took Patricia's arm, and walked out of the courtroom into the afternoon sun. The sentencing hearing was a month later, but Margaret didn't attend. She asked Ada Santos to represent her interests and sent a victim impact statement to be read to the court. Patricia told her what happened. Victoria received 3 years in prison, with possibility of parole after 18 months. Marcus received 4 years due to his larger role in the fraud. Mr. Harrison received 5 years and permanent disbarment. All 3 were also ordered to pay restitution, though none of them had any money left after legal fees. But the legal victory was only part of Margaret's justice. The real story was what happened to the business. Margaret didn't sell to Pacific Northwest Grocers. Instead, she reorganized the entire company. She created a new structure with herself as CEO, James Wu as CFO, and a board of directors that included Patricia, Detective Morrison, and 3 independent business leaders from the Seattle community. Then she brought in Tyler. "Grandma, I don't understand," Tyler said when she called him to her office at the flagship store. "Why do you want me involved? I'm just a college student." "You're my grandson," Margaret replied. "And you're honest. That's worth more than any business degree." She started teaching him everything: how to read financial statements, how to negotiate with suppliers, how to manage employees, how to handle difficult decisions. Tyler worked part-time while finishing his degree, learning the business from the ground up just as Margaret had 40 years ago. The stores flourished. Without the stress of family betrayal, without the constant worry about who was stealing from her, Margaret's health continued to improve. She lost weight, started exercising, even began dating a widower she met at her church. She felt younger at 69 than she had at 65. She also started a nonprofit organization, the Elder Protection Foundation. Using some of her fortune, she created a resource center for elderly people facing financial abuse from family members. She hired lawyers to provide free consultations, accountants to review suspicious transactions, and counselors to help victims process the betrayal. Financial abuse thrives in silence, Margaret told a reporter from the Seattle Times who interviewed her about the foundation. Victims don't want to admit their own children are stealing from them. They feel ashamed, but there's no shame in being victimized. The shame belongs to the people who abuse trust. The article ran with a photo of Margaret standing in front of her original store, the one she had opened in 1982. She looked strong, confident, successful. The article was shared thousands of times on social media. Other victims reached out, sharing their stories, asking for help. Margaret helped everyone she could. As for Victoria and Marcus, their lives fell apart completely. Victoria's real estate license was revoked. Her condo was foreclosed after she couldn't make payments during her incarceration. Marcus's consulting business, which had been barely surviving, collapsed entirely. His creditors sued him and he declared bankruptcy from prison. Tyler visited his mother once in prison. He came back shaken and sad. "She wanted me to ask you for money," he told Margaret, "for her commissary account. She said she's family and family helps each other." Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What did you tell her?" "I told her that family means more than blood. It means trust and respect and loyalty, and she broke all of those." Margaret hugged her grandson. "You're going to be okay, Tyler. You're going to be more than okay." And he was. Tyler graduated with honors, immediately joining Margaret's company full-time. She made him a vice president and gave him responsibility for 3 stores. He worked hard, made mistakes, learned from them, and grew into the role. Employees respected him not because he was the owner's grandson, but because he treated them fairly and worked alongside them. 2 years after the trial, Margaret updated her will. The business would go to Tyler, but not immediately. When Margaret passed away, the company would transfer to a trust managed by Patricia and James, with Tyler as the primary beneficiary. He would receive increasing ownership stakes as he hit certain milestones: successful management for 5 years, opening a new location, maintaining profitability, treating employees ethically. "I'm not giving you an inheritance," Margaret told Tyler. "I'm giving you an opportunity, just like my late husband gave me." Margaret also made provisions for Victoria and Marcus. When they were released from prison, if they could demonstrate 5 years of honest work, staying out of legal trouble and making restitution to their victims, they would each receive $50,000. Not from the business, but from a separate account Margaret set up specifically for this purpose. "It's not forgiveness," Margaret explained to Patricia. "It's a safety net. I don't want them to have an excuse to commit more crimes because they're desperate. But they have to earn it by proving they've changed." 3 years after the trial, Margaret received a letter from Victoria. It was written on prison stationery in shaky handwriting. "Dear Mom, I've had a lot of time to think about what I did. 3 years of time. I can't undo it. I can't take back the words I said or the plans I made. I can't give you back the trust I destroyed. But I want you to know that I understand now. I understand what I threw away. Not the money or the business. I threw away my mother. I threw away the person who loved me most in the world, and I will regret that for the rest of my life. I don't ask for forgiveness because I don't deserve it. I just want you to know that I'm sorry. I'm so, so sorry. Victoria." Margaret read the letter 3 times. Then she put it in a drawer and never answered it. Some betrayals cut too deep for forgiveness. Some wounds never fully heal. Margaret had moved on, built a new life, found peace, but she would never forget what her children had tried to do to her. That was okay. She didn't need to forget. She just needed to make sure it never happened again, not to her and not to anyone else she could help. Life taught me that family isn't defined by blood, but by loyalty and respect. When people show you who they truly are, especially those closest to you, believe them the first time. Building wealth takes decades of sacrifice, but it can be stolen in moments by those you trust most. Protect what you've earned, not out of selfishness, but out of wisdom. Being vulnerable doesn't mean being weak. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is protect yourself from the people who are supposed to protect you. Your legacy isn't just what you leave behind, it's who you choose to give it to and why. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.